the concept of decentralization, which is something you have written quite a bit about. Could you talk about the intellectual roots and history and impact of decentralization and contrast that with the history of centralization of power and what those two contrasting ideas do to us as a society?
Sure. I mean, the whole idea of decentralization, of course, is based on the original Constitution, and even before that. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson made it clear that what they were doing is seceding from the British Empire, 13 individual states, and he chose that phrase, that term very carefully. I mean, he could have said we are 13 provinces, 13 counties, 13 shires, but he said, no, we're 13 individual states, and we're seceding from the British Empire. Then, of course, if you look at the Articles of Confederation, which was a decentralized government, the states had all the authority. And then when you get to the Constitution, of course, the way that it was argued at the time of ratification is that this was simply going to be a general government for general purposes, which was nothing more than commerce and defense. And the states would still have all of the control of the government. So, and if you look at the original Senate, that was by design. The states actually elected the senators from the state legislature. So this whole idea that we have a national government is just completely preposterous. And that was actually, if that's what the founding generation had thought, the Constitution never would have been ratified because they were completely opposed to it. A national government, of course, centralizes power in one location, whether it's Philadelphia, New York, or Washington, D.C., and again, I mean, that was alien to the founding principles of the United States. What they feared the most is that you would have this central authority that would be able to dictate to all 13 independent communities what their domestic policies would be. And so these states very much had control over all the domestic issues. The only thing the central authority had was, again, commerce and defense, and that was by design.
And I'd like to, from what you were just talking about, I'd like to expand a little bit on how the definitions of nation and state have actually changed over time, and what their original meaning was and what their meaning is now, and what caused the meaning of those words to change.
Well, sure, that's actually a very good question. I actually used to assign my students a task of going out and finding those definitions, define a nation, a state, and a people. And of course, in modern definitions, if you look up in Webster's dictionary, a state is going to be a political subdivision of the central authority, because that's where they're basing it on, the way we look at the modern federal government today, or as the founders call it, the general government. And of course, a nation is essentially this conglomeration of all the states. So the United States, too, in the modern definition, is a nation, whereas the founders actually thought of a nation as a singular group of people that had a singular culture, whether it was in a unifying theme, whether it was language, religion, custom, and of course the state was a sovereign political entity. So we've flipped these two things on their head. The founders would never say the United States are a nation. They would say the United States are 13 or however many states you have. It's a the states united. It's a union of independent states. And what we've done today is completely distort that. We call the United States a nation now, when it really isn't. And I think that's an important designation for Americans to make.
Yes, and could that distinction that for some reason we're incapable of making, and perhaps it's because of the nature of our public education system, could that really change the way we see ourselves and the way we live our lives? Because we look at ourselves as people who are part of a group. And could that actually impact the way we develop as human beings, because we no longer view ourselves as sovereign individuals, but a part of a larger collective?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, the public education system is destroying everything. And I think that, as you're saying, there's a collective. We're one people. This one people mass that made the Constitution is completely ridiculous. It's alien, again, to what the founders thought. And, of course, the idea, you often hear this, well, if we weren't a nation, then you'd have fragmentation and wars, and everybody would fight amongst each other. Well, actually not. I mean, if the Union was worked the way it was designed, and all you had was a central authority in D.C. saying, okay, well, we need to have common defense, protect our shores, and we need to make sure that we have free trade zones across the states, we'd all be fine with that. And, of course, if you wanted to have your socialist utopia in Massachusetts, you could have it. And if you didn't want to have it and pick your state, Alabama, Mississippi, wherever it is, Wyoming, Montana, you don't have to have it there. So this was the most democratic thing to do, and they all recognized that. It would help. It would actually foster more congeniality between the states, I think, and of course the founders thought that too. The only way to maintain a conglomeration of people is through tyranny and despotism, and they pointed this out in the founding period, and that's exactly what we have today.
And speaking of education, you've made a career out of being an educator, and given the nature of the world that we live in and how bureaucratic it is and how difficult it is to move up in the world when we espouse the ideas of liberty, would you recommend that those who are interested in promoting liberty go along the career path that you have gone, or is that too difficult to do these days because of the obstacles that are put in our way if we were to become a professor and try and espouse these types of ideas?
Well, I think it's difficult no matter what you do. The job market is terrible, whether you're on the left or the right, or whether you're someone who believes in liberty or not. You're going to have a better chance if you're a Marxist or someone who believes in the American nation and this one people ideology. But the fact is, it's a tough job market. Now, when I was coming through, of course, I worked with Clyde Wilson, and there are very few people out there who are now in graduate programs who you can work with as a historian. So what you'd have to do is try to go to the best schools you could, keep your nose down to your books and do your work. And generally, I think you can get through. Now, getting hired is going to be another story, but there's all kinds of avenues out there that people don't explore. I, of course, work in a community college environment, and it's a great environment for fostering liberty and promoting those type of things, because I'm basically left alone. So there are ways to do it, and I think if someone really wants to do that, if that's their passion, I think that's great, and we need more people out there. And also, I mean, stuff like you're doing now is fantastic too. Reaching people, you don't have to necessarily go through the traditional channels of education. The internet, blogs, writing for websites, doing radio programs, anything you can do to spread the word of liberty is just a fantastic thing.
And to expand on spreading the word of liberty, actually it goes right into my next question of how we can sell decentralization to a public that's been taught that decentralization only brings out racism and ultimately chaos, and how decentralization affects us from a cultural and religious standpoint in terms of potentially being able to preserve our traditions and values.
Well, I mean, I think this idea that decentralization only brings racism is, people have a short view. I think that one thing you can do as someone who believes in it is say, well, look, if you look at the states today, which state, which entity, the federal government or the states are more receptive to something like, gay marriage? Well, I mean, it's going to be the state of Massachusetts. The federal government has no interest in it, nor should it. This is really a state issue. If you look at, say, for example, religious liberty, it was Virginia, not the central government, that actually had the first, laws fostering religious liberty. The first, essentially, Bill of Rights, as we would say, as college today, that protected religious liberty at that level. So the states have always been at the vanguard. It was the states that abolished slavery first, not the other way around. The central government was behind in that. So the states really set the stage and set the tone. And people don't realize that. They don't think about it, but that's the way it works. So if you're really interested in liberty, you are closer to the location of power in your state. 40 people on the courthouse steps of your local community or your town or city is more important than 40 people on the U.S. Capitol steps. You can make a lot more noise and affect a lot more change. So if you are interested in the cause of liberty or your cause in general, you need to be working at the state and local level, not at the national government or general government.
That's great. We're gonna have to wrap things up in a couple minutes, but I wanted to also give you some time, and I mentioned a little bit of it earlier, how people can find the books that you've written and the articles you've written, and how people can learn more about you and your writing.
Sure. I mean, all my books are available on Amazon. The Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution is my newest, and it came out in January. It's up there on Amazon. You can get it there. You can actually go to the Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution.com and get a free chapter, and it also directs you either to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, one of those, to buy it. The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers came out in 2009, and it's also available on Amazon or anywhere books are sold generally. My two newest books, of course, The Forgotten Conservatives in American History does not come out till May, and that's with Clyde Wilson. And then my Politically Incorrect Guide to Real American Heroes doesn't hit the shelves till November of this year. So those two books are yet to come out. But I do write for the Daily Caller. You can go to my website, BrionMcClanahan.com. I also have a fan page on Facebook that you can find me, and I post when I post articles there. And you can find me that way as well. So I look forward to meeting all your listeners and anyone who's interested in liberty.
Yeah, that's great. And one last question. We got about maybe 30 seconds or so. Could you tell us and everyone who's watching what made you interested in liberty? I don't know if it was a culmination of events or if it was one singular event that turned you, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I think when I was in college, I had some very good professors, and my family has generally always been, very much open-minded in terms of, limited government and decentralization and these things. So I had that growing up, but by the time I got to college and I started looking at some of the major issues we have, and of course, as you study history, you find that governments are generally the ones that are destroying liberty and killing people, yeah. Whereas, it's not the other way around. And so you start to read these things and you think, my gosh, the light bulb goes off, and then you start looking at the founding documents and other things, and you think, wow, I mean, this is really where this is the most important cause we have to maintain these founding principles, and they've been so distorted. And I really wanted to bring that to people and try to get the word out as best I could. And there's a lot of us out there doing it now, and thankfully so. And I think that the tide is turning, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Brion. It was great to have you. Great stuff. And I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, great.